All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. A beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Chaf Gimel 123. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Steve and Terry Zinn, for dedicating all of the shiurim this week in memory of Steve's mother, Doris Devora Bas Yisrael Yoel, and with Akaras Atov to the entire Kehillah for the outpouring of support shown to their family during their time of need. Week of Learning dedicated by Aaron and Alana Weinberg, in gratitude to Hashem for Yonatan Shai Weinberg's complete refuah 9 years ago. Week of Learning sponsored Dr. Gabriel and Florence Gorell in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Florence's mother, Esther Schwimmer, Esther Bas Avri Ezri Zelig, Zichron Livracha, the Gayson family in memory of Dr. Alan Gayson, Elio ben Menachem Mendel HaKohen, in commemoration of his first yahrzeit, and today's shir, dedicated by Richard and Sharon Buck, in honor of the Hanachas Tefillin of their son Avinoam. A mazel tov to the Buck Mishpacha, an incredible milestone. You could join Avinoam and the rest of the Mishpacha at the shul in the tents at 7 o'clock a.m. for this special milestone. And they also want to thank Greg and Rachel Levitan for dedicating the daf this morning in honor of the birth, Baruch Hashem, of our granddaughter to our children, Shani and Yosef Bizwadi, in the schus of the Torah Miras Hashem. Her parents should be zocha legat l'Torah, l'chuppah, u'lemaisim tovim. I want to say we thank all of our sponsors. We hope that all the neshamas have an aliyah, all of the families a nechama, and the Miras Hashem, all of us should have nachas from our children and our grandchildren. And I will say with that, let us begin. So I'll say, so today's daf is Kuf Chaf Gimel 123, and we are picking up on Kuf Chaf Beis 122 at the 2 dots. It is 3, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. So it says the Gemara, Amrav Yehuda, no to Adam Kornos. Remember again, the Mishnah said, so we'll say the Mishnah introduced us to the concept of a kli shemalachto le'iser, which is a utensil. Again, the truth is we've seen this before, but this is a primary topic over here. The concept of if you have a utensil, utensil's primary use is prohibited in nature. So the simplest example of this would be a hammer, right? So again, we're going to discuss in greater depth the parameters of this halacha, but a hammer is primarily used for building. Building, of course, is going to be asr on Shabbos. So halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah said that if you want to go ahead and use the hammer to go ahead and crack open nuts, right, then that will be permitted on Shabbos. It says the Gemara, Amrav Yehuda, and I will say that we're gonna define the parameters of that halacha actually today. So the Gemara says, Amrav Yehuda, corner shal agozim liftoah ba'as agozim. So Rabbi Yehuda says, when we say you could use a hammer, it means you could use a nut hammer. So I guess, in the days before nut crackers, so they had nut hammers, a little hammer to crack nuts. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Yehuda says, when we say that you could use a hammer to crack nuts, that's a nut hammer. Aval shel nefachin lo. But l'maisa, you cannot use like a blacksmith's hammer, or we'll say, or for that matter, a building hammer to crack nuts. Kasavar, because Rabbi Yehuda holds davar shemalachto le'isra afilu tzorach gufo aser. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds, we'll say that if you have a utensil whose primary use is of a prohibited nature on Shabbos, you cannot use that utensil, even what we call it tzorech gufo. We'll say tzorech gufo means the ability to use that utensil in a permitted fashion. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that a kli shemalachto le'iser, right, a utensil whose primary use is prohibited, for example, a hammer, in this case a blacksmith's hammer, even though you want to use it on Shabbos to crack nuts, which is permitted, there's nothing wrong cracking nuts on Shabbos, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot use a blacksmith's hammer for that. Rather, again, you could only use a nut hammer for that. So Rabbi says, Elameato seifa diktani ves ha-rechas ves ha-mazleg lo seis alav l'katan. Here's the problem with this, Rabbi says. The end of the Mishnah says that you could also go ahead and take a winnowing shovel or a pitchfork in order to hand something to a child who is at a distance. So it says the Gemara, Bepashtas, these are farming utensils. So the Gemara says, Resech, Reches, Umazleg Mimi Yachade Leilakatan. Does someone have a special fruit winnowing shovel or a fruit pitchfork? No, Bepashtas, you're using farming implements, right? Which are technically speaking a kli shemalachto le'iser, a utensil whose primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, and yet the Mishnah says that you can use it in a permitted fashion, in this case, to hand fruit to your child. Ella Amar Rabba, rather Rabba says, Kornos shal nefachim levatzea boas hagozim. Rather Rabba says as follows, the Mishnah is teaching me that I can use a blacksmith's hammer in order to crack nuts. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that you could take a utensil, which is a kli shemalachta le'isur, a utensil whose primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, and halacha l'maisa, you can use it in a permitted way. Kasavar Rabba holds, top of Kuf Chaf Gimel, davar shemalachta le'isur letzorech gufo mutter. Because Rabba holds, Rabba say that you could take a davar shemalachta le'isur, a utensil whose primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, and you could use it in a permitted way on Shabbos. Eis ve'abayi l'Rabba. Sabai posed the question to Rabba, Meducha. So we'll say Meducha is a pestle. Im yesh bo shum metaltlinosa. If the Meducha, right, if the pestle, right, it's a receptacle in which you grind something in. So ultimately, remember again, the act of grinding is asur on Shabbos. So im yesh shum. If there's garlic inside of inside of the meducha, metaltlinosa, then you're permitted to go ahead and carry it. Ve'im lav, but if there's no garlic inside of it, in metaltlinosa, you can't carry it. Nebepashtos, again, the mortar is a right. The mortar is a klisha malachtul iser. So yet, what are we saying over here? That halacha l'maisa, if there's food inside of it, you could carry it. But if there's no food inside of it, you can't carry it. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. So the Gemara says, "Ve'im lav in metaltlin kigon leishev aleha kevon deikar malachto lishchika dehi maleches iser mishum tochin." So we'll say this. What's interesting now? Again, in the case of, let's say, a mortar and a pestle, saloch lamaisa, the mortar, will say, so meaning you could go ahead and use it as a seat, right? You could use it as a chair. There are other uses for it. Yet we see that halacha lamaisa, you're not allowed to move it on Shabbos unless, of course, there's food inside of it, or for that matter, Yom Tov, unless, of course, there's food inside of it. So lamaisa, again, you see that a kli shemalachtu le'isur cannot be utilized for a permitted purpose on Shabbos. Amalei Rabba says that's not a kasha. Whose opinion does this brayso reflect? Hamani Rabbi Nechemia. It's Rabbi Nechemia. The Amar ein kli nital ella litzorech tashmisho. Rabbi Nechemia happens to hold that a utensil can only be moved or can only be taken for the sake of its primary purpose. Okay, so we'll say, there is a different opinion. Rabbi says, listen, we'll say, klal gadol in life is to recognize that not everybody is going to agree with you. The moment in life you could accept the fact that not everybody agrees with you, it's a much happier life. So Rabbi says, listen, there's another opinion out there. I'm not the only opinion over here. So Rabbi Nechemia holds that a utensil cannot be moved except for its primary purpose, and he's the author of that brayso that says that the mortar cannot be moved unless, of course, there's garlic, there's food inside of it. Eisveis, we raise another kasha. Beishamai omrim enotlin esa ali lekatsev alav basar. Beishamai says you can't move the pestle to go ahead and cut meat on it. Ubeis Hillel matirin, and Beis Hillel holds that you are permitted. Vishavin shim katsev alav basar, but both agree that what? That halacha lemaisa, once you have used it to cut meat, like as a cutting board on top of it, sha'asla taltalo, that you are not permitted to go ahead and carry it anymore. Look at Rashi again. The Gemara says, I will say, now this is talking about over here on Yom Tov, it happens to be. So Machlokes Yeshar Beis Hillel, can you move the pestle to begin with? Beis Shammai says no, right? To go ahead and cut meat on it, Beis Hillel says yes. But they both agree that once you've used it as a cutting board and you've cut meat on it, that you can no longer go ahead and move it. Look at Rashi. Shas l'taltalo, dahai de kasharu Beis Hillel, mishum simchas Yom Tov kasharu. Because that which Beis Hillel allowed you to move the pestle to cut meat on it was because of simchas Yom Tov. Rejoy alma mishum de ali melachto le'isr, the tishas tragis v'tisni uklipas eitzim lave b'hen oros asa. So let's listen to this. So Beis Hillel allows you to go ahead and move the pestle in order to go ahead and cut meat on it because of simchas Yom Tov. But even Beis Hillel agrees that once the meat has been cut on the pestle, you are not permitted to move it anymore. Not permitted to move it anymore. Which Abose tells you that even were you to find some permitted use for the pestle, you would not be permitted to move it on Yom Tiv. So what do you see from here? So remember, there's a kasha on Rabbah. Rabbah, you said that a kli shemalachto le'isr, a utensil's primary use is prohibited on Shabbos and or Yom Tov, because there's a concept of muktzah on Yom Tov as well, halacha l'maisa can be moved for a permitted purpose. Yet here we clearly see that that's not the case. Savar l'shalmi is to which Rabbi said, Savar l'shalmi Rabbi Nechemia. So Rabbi wanted to once again say, oh, it must be that the author of this particular brisa once again is Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia has a much more restrictive view. Rabbi Nechemia holds that a utensil can only be moved for the purposes of its primary use. Kevan d'shama lahada amrav chinana bar shalmia mishmei derav hakol modim besichi zairi umezuri. Everyone agrees about sichi are spindles, zairi are like clothespins, and mezuri are hammers or mallets. The chivan the kapit alayhu, since people both say in general are makbid on these items. In other words, either because they were expensive or because they had specialized uses, therefore people are makbid to only use it for its designated purpose. Miyachid luhu makom, people designate a specific space for these items, and because they are given their own specific space, therefore what? Halacha l'maisa, they're muktzah Shabbos. Hachinami, so too over here, by the pesel, miyachid luhu makom, a person goes ahead and sets it aside in a place for it to be kept, and because it's set aside in a particular place, therefore by definition it's set aside for non-use. And because it's set aside for non-use, therefore halacha l'maisa, it is muktzah. Itmar Rabbi Chia Barabba Amram Yochanan. So therefore again, we're still at our machlokas. We've got Rabbah telling us that a klisha malachto le'iser, a utensil whose primary use is prohibited on Shabbos, can be moved l'tzorech gufo. You can use it for a permitted purpose on Shabbos. Rabbi Nechemia telling us that a utensil could only be used on Shabbos for its primary purpose. So if its primary purpose is a permitted one for Shabbos, then you could use the utensil. But if the primary purpose is not permitted for Shabbos use, then halacha l'maisa, you can't use it on Shabbos. Itmar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Kurnus shel zahavim shaninu. Now let's go back to the Mishnah. Remember how this whole discussion started? Here's what the Mishnah told me. The Mishnah told me that I could take a hammer and use it to crack open nuts on Shabbos. And I will say, what was the shayla the Gemara is dealing with? What kind of hammer? What kind of hammer are we dealing with over here? So remember again, we had a couple of different opinions. You had Rabbi Yehuda who said, it's a nut hammer. You can use a nut hammer to crack open nuts, but you can't use any other kind of hammer to crack open nuts. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi came along and said, no, it's even a building hammer, right? Or even a blacksmith's hammer. Meaning the type of hammer that's used for a prohibited activity, you could still go ahead and utilize that on Shabbos to crack nuts for a permitted purpose. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan, Kurnu shel zahavim shaninu. He says it's even a goldsmith's hammer, right? The goldsmith's hammer. Reb Shimon bar Abba Amar Kurnus shel besamim, even a hammer used for spices. So we'll say, so again, so apparently they used to use a hammer like to crush up spices and herbs. Man damar de besamim. So we'll say the opinion who said that you could use a spice hammer, all the more so you could use a gold hammer. Because we'll say again, remember the gold hammer, people were very makbid as to what you used your gold hammer for. Right? So we'll say, so remember again, what do you, because remember, if you're hammering out sheets of gold, you need to make sure that your hammer is absolutely smooth. Because if the hammer is not smooth, you could ruin the sheet of gold. So because that, people were makbid not to use their gold hammers for other things. So the opinion who says, yet interestingly enough, the one thing apparently that you would be even more makbid with than your gold hammer was your spice hammer. Because apparently, again, you wouldn't normally use your spice hammer for other things, also because of the smell, meaning you wanted that hammer to be reserved for the use of spices. So the opinion who holds that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and use it for besamim. The spice hammer certainly says you could use the gold hammer to crack open the nuts. Man damer shal zahavim, but the opinion says the gold hammer about the besamim kapir alayhu. We'll say you could use the gold hammer, but you can't use the spice hammer, because spice hammers, everyone knows, people are much more makbid on. Okay, so we'll say, so again, there might be some level of discussion in terms of what type of hammer, but it appears that the majority opinion that's coming out now is like Rabbah, namely that the teaching of the Mishnah is that you could take a hammer that would normally be muktzah on Shabbos. Why is it muktzah? It is what's called a kli shmalachto le'isr. It is a utensil whose primary use is prohibited on Shabbos. Blacksmithing, building, hammering out gold, crushing spices. Yet the Mishnah teaches me that halacha l'maaseh I could use it in a permitted way. In this case, the permitted way being crushing up spices on Shabbos. Beautiful, says the Gemara. I'm sorry, I just forgot. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. Ve'es hakush ve'es hakarkar. So remember again, next was kush and karkar. So you can go ahead and take a spindle. This was in the Mishnah. Spindle or a weaving rod, litchov bo, in order to spear a piece of fruit. So the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanon, paga shetamna b'tevin v'chara shetamna b'gecham. So this is an interesting discussion. Paga is like a fig. So if you have a fig that was covered up in straw, or a biscuit, chara is literally a biscuit, like a roll, sheptamna b'gechalim, that was covered in coals. So I'll say, so here's the issue. Both of these items, now again, the fig, of course, is not muktzah. The roll is not muktzah. The issue is that they're covered in muktzah material, right? The straw will be muktzah, or the coals will be muktzah. But I want to remove the fig, or I want to remove the roll. How do I do that? So if part of the fig or part of the roll is uncovered, therefore I will say, what could I do? I can go ahead and lift up the fig, lift up the roll. Now, what's the novelty in that? You could remove it. What's the novelty? The novelty is that even though I'm going to end up moving the straw, or I'm going to end up moving the coals, it is permitted on Shabbos. Why, says Rashi, what is this called? This is called tiltul min hatzad. So the truth is, we'll see, this is not even, Rashi is not even really called tiltul min hatzad. It's like an incidental moving. I'm not really even moving the straw directly. I'm not moving the coals directly, and therefore it's not a problem. Ve'im lav, but if there is no uncovered part of the fig or no uncovered part of the roll, then I can't remove it on Shabbos. In other words, I will say what I'm not allowed to do is move aside the coals or move aside the straw, because at the end of the day, that would be the movement of muktzah. Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai says, Tochvin bekush o bekarkar, vehemin aros me'aleim. So Rabbi Elazar has a different approach. He says, spear it, right? Spear the roll or spear the fig with the spindle or with the weaving rod, and pull it out like that. And again, if the straw ends up moving, it doesn't matter to us. Or if the coals end up moving, it doesn't matter to us, since I am not the one who's going ahead and moving it. Amar Rav Nachman, halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi. So Rav Nachman said the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi. That halacha l'maisa, just go ahead and spear it with something and pull the item out. Again, obviously this requires the item to be a little bit revealed so you could find where it is. But the fact that the straw ends up moving or the coals end up moving, that's not considered me moving muktzah. Amar Rav Nachman, halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai, l'meimra, the Sav Rav Nachman tiltul min hatzad lo shmei tiltul. And Abbas, remember again, this is what we mentioned before. Even though Rashi says this is not really tiltul min hatzad, the Gemara calls it tiltul. So what's tiltul min hatzad? Incidental movement. Incidental movement. So I think about this for just a moment. You have a biscuit, right, that is covered in coals. So now what we're saying over here is spear the biscuit and pull it out. But when you pull it out, you're going to end up moving the coals. That's called tiltul min hatzad. That's called incidental movement. I'm not really moving the coals. I'm moving the roll, which ends up moving the coals. But number one is I'm not moving the coals directly. Number two, that's not really even my intention. Right? My intention is to go ahead and get the roll. Yet how? So both say, so is that true that Rav Nachman holds that that's permitted? Vam Rav Nachman, hai pugla. Both say, so if you have pugla is a radish. So ultimately, again, Rashi says tznon. Tznon toloshet minabaris v'niskala rosha. So let's listen to this interesting case. I have a radish that was detached from the ground, but then I buried it back into the ground. Now watch this. So Amar Rav Nachman says as follows. Hai pugla, if you have this radish that's in the dirt, so milamala lemata shari. So if you pull it out, right? If let's say the bottom of the radish is on top, and the top part of the radish is on the bottom. So milamala lemata. So Rashi says milamala lemata imhaya ha'elyon shala lemala. I'm sorry. If the upper part of the radish was on top. So in other words, you put the radish back into the ground, but the top of it is sticking out of the earth. So milamala lamata, himaya elyon shala lamala, vakotzer, and the more narrow part of the radish, the bottom of the radish, is below. Kishu sholfa choltzame elyon shala letachton shala v'rochav hatznon lamala mutter deleka totlavar. So very simply, what Rav Nachman says is like this: I have a radish that I detached on Erev Shabbos. It's detached. Then I decided to put it back in the dirt. Right? Now I want to go ahead and take it out of the dirt. Now both say, what you're going to see over here is really what happened over. It's not that I totally covered it with dirt. It's still, the top of it is still exposed. I want to pull it out. Rav Nachman says, you could pull it out essentially as long as you don't end up displacing or moving any dirt. So essentially, if the wide part of the radish is on top, that means when you pull it out, no dirt has to move. On the flip side, if the wider part of the olive is inside, is lower down, and the narrow part of the olive is on top, then when you pull it out, you'll end up displacing dirt. And Rav Nachman says you can't do that. So what does that show you? They're both saying, now this is another case of this is indirect movement of muktzah, what we call tiltul menatzad. Yet Rav Nachman is saying you can't do it. So the Gemara says, Hajabe Rav Nachman Me'ahi. Rav Nachman retracted that position. Okay, so apparently they both say the way it worked is like this. It used to be that Rav Nachman held tiltul minatzad, secondary movement of muktzah, is aser. That's what he used to hold. But then halacha l'maisi changed his position, and now he holds tiltul minatzad is mutter. And they both say that is indeed how we hold halacha l'maisa. That indirect movement of muktzah is mutter on Shabbos. Now both say, now to be clear, we only use that concept sparingly and only in certain circumstances. So in certain circumstances where halacha l'maisa, I need something, there's a need, however we define need, and again, let's say there's a muktzah item that's sitting on top of the item that I need, there's a way, halacha sometimes not for the shaking off of the muktzah item or just the rolling off of the muktzah. Indirect movement under certain circumstances will be mutter. Beautiful. Machat shayad lital ba. So remember again, the Mishnah said that you could take a needle, a hand needle, and use it to take out splinters. Well, so remember again, once again, a needle is a kli shemalachtu le'isr. Right? A needle has a primarily prohibited use. Yet the halacha is I'm permitted to go ahead and use it to take out a splinter on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Shalach le Rava berei de Rava Rav Yosef. So Rava, the son of Rava, said, Rav Yosef, Ilamdeinu Rabbeinu, Rebbe, teach us, Machat shenita charara o uktzamahu. What happens if you have a needle? And let's say we'll say, so charara literally means the eye. The eye of the needle was removed. Or the point of the needle was removed. So what is the status of such a needle? Amar le Tinisua, we learned Machat Shal Yad, the middle of the Mishnah say that you could take a needle, right? What we call a hand needle, a needle used for sewing, little bas hakots, and you could use in order to take out a splinter. V'chima ichbas le lakots bein nukuva bein shein nukuva. So, in order to remove a splinter, what do you need? You don't need an eye. You don't need an eye of the needle. What do you just need? All you need is the point of the needle. So you see from here that as long as the needle retains its sharp tip, it retains its identity as a needle. Apparently, even if it loses its eye, it could still retain its identity as a needle. So the Gemara says, Eisvei, raise the kasha, machat shenitel charara o uktzah. If you have a needle, and you went ahead and you removed the eye of the needle, or you removed the tip of the needle, so tahora. Ultimately, again, we'll say the needle is going to be tar. Now we'll say what tar means is what the Gemara, so this is obviously tuma. So the Gemara says over here, or tar I should say, once you remove the eye or the tip, halacha l'maisa, the needle loses its identity as a kli. And once it loses its identity as a kli, if it did in fact possess tuma, that tuma dissipates. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye. So we'll say, so now that would appear to teach me that what? That for Shabbos also. Therefore, once the needle goes ahead and loses its eye or loses its tip, it should no longer be a kli and should be muktzah Shabbos as well. So Amar Abaye says, Tuma Shabbos karamis. Why are you comparing Tuma and Shabbos? After all, Tuma kli ma'aseh ba'inan. So also remember again, it's different when it comes to Tuma. So remember again, the laws of Tuma are determined by what is considered to be a kli maisa, complete kli. All right, so everyone will agree that for a needle to be a complete kli, what does it need? It needs an eye and it needs a tip. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, if it's missing either one of those things, then what? Then it no longer has the identity of a kli, and therefore again is no longer makabel. And if it was tamei, now becomes tar. By Shabbos, I will say, what do you need? Shabbos, midi dichazi ba'inan v'hanami chazia lemishkali bekutz. We'll say by Shabbos, it's an issue of functionality. Does this item still function, still serve a constructive purpose? And the halacha is that if you have a needle, even if it doesn't have an eye, as long as it still has a tip, halacha l'maisa, again, it functions normally, and therefore, again, can be used on Shabbos. Amar Rava, man de kamosiv shapir kamosiv. Rava says, no, don't be so dismissive. The question is a good question. Midle inyan tuma lav manahu, le'inyan Shabbos nami lav manahu. So we'll say, Rava says, no, there is a connection, Avosai, both for Shabbos and for tuma. Really, you need the object to satisfy the criteria of a kli. And therefore, if you're going to tell me that for tumah purposes, once the eye or once the tip is removed, it no longer has the identity of a kli, of a utensil. If that is true for tumah, then ultimately, again, that should be true for Shabbos as well. If you have a needle, whether it has an eye or doesn't have an eye, you are permitted to go ahead and carry it on Shabbos. As Rabbi says, even an eyeless needle on Shabbos still has the identity of a kli, of a utensil, and therefore can be moved on Shabbos. And ultimately, again, they only said about a needle without an eye. So the only time that came up was by Tumah. So apparently, again, the Gemara, this Bryce Shabbosai is being mechalik, making a distinction between Shabbos and Tumah. Einachinami for Tumah, in order for an object to be makabel Tumah, to retain its Tumah, it must be a completely intact kli. The definition of a completely intact kli, ultimately, again, for Tumah purposes or for needle purposes, is both an eye and a tip. Masha Enkin by Shabbos halacha l'maisa, all you need is functionality. As long as the needle has a tip, even if it doesn't have an eye, it's still functional, and therefore still should be makabel tumah. Tirgama Abaya liba derava bigomi askinan. So Abaya, what are we talking about over here? Gomi. So we'll say, interestingly enough, if you look at Rashi, gomi machtina omdos linakev dinekuva nigmara malachta v'she'ena nekuva ena nigmara malachta. Hilchach le'inyan tumahu delo havikli. So what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a needle that is being fashioned. So I will say there's a distinction the Gemara is making over here between a needle that was already a needle that lost its eye or lost its tip versus a needle that mitchila is being fashioned now. When it's being fashioned now, before you go ahead and you make the eye in the needle, sometimes that eyeless needle would just simply be discarded into the scrap heap. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, "Zimnin demimlach alayu mashvi luhumana." Sometimes, right? If it's a not yet fully fashioned needle, so sometimes, ultimately, again, sometimes halacha l'maisa, a person will not pierce it, not make the eye, and just use it as a different type of needle in order to go ahead and take out splinters. But sometimes a person just simply would not use such a utensil. Aval hecha denitl charara. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. So halacha l'maisa, when you have a needle that has not yet been completed. So when it's not yet been completed, halacha l'maisa, a person may choose not to put the eye in the needle and just simply set this aside as a splinter needle. That's a splinter needle, and a splinter needle does not need an eye, of course, as is understandable. However, hecha denitl charara o ukza. But I will say, if a person had an already complete needle, and then that needle lost something, either its eye or its tip, many times Adam Zarka lebein grutos. Many times a person will take such a needle and throw it into the scrap heap. So because of throwing into the scrap heap, therefore it does not have the identity of a kli. All right, asuve yenuka. So what's an interesting shaila over here? So let's say Baruch baby was born, but the baby was born as a result of birth. The limbs, were I don't know what the technical term is, but the limbs are out of the joints. So the baby has to be what they call straightening of the baby. So I'll say, interestingly enough, What they used to do in Talmudic times is they would swaddle the baby very tightly with the hope that that would put the limbs back into their joints, back into their sockets. So are you permitted to do this on Shabbos? Can you straighten out the baby on Shabbos? So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman says you're not allowed to do so. Rav Nachman Rashi says the dami lemetakin, because Rabbi say this has the appearance of fixing, like almost like a makebe patish type of thing, right? On the flip side of Shesha says that it's mutter. Rav Nachman said, "Minamin Allah, how do I know that it's usher to straighten out the baby on Shabbos?" This nan, because we learned ein osin amud beis, ein osin afik tvizin b'Shabbos. You cannot go ahead and consume afik tvizin. So we'll say, what's afik tvizin b'Shabbos? What's afik tvizin? If you look at Rashi, lahaki shosem mashkem umaki v'lo l'rafua el laharikis me'ev shiyuchal lecha v'lishtos hayom harbe k'damrin per chabis v'af v'agav lo gazra mishum schika samanim daha lav l'rafua he asr mishum dematakin gavra. We'll say afik tvizin is something a person would drink. Again, I don't know, I'm sure there's a technical term for it, in order to induce vomiting. So we'll say, interestingly enough, this is actually quite fascinating. This was not done for medicinal purposes. This was done to clear out the insides to be able to eat more. It sounds actually like a shtigl Epicurean over here, right? So we'll say, so it's quite fascinating. So you would drink this stuff in order to induce vomiting so that you could eat more. So we'll say, so Rav Nachman says, you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do this. And I both say, this is not, that's why I said, this is not refuah. This is not refuah. So ultimately, Rav Nachman says you can't do this on Shabbos, right? And why can't you do it on Shabbos? So Nachman understands because an individual, quote unquote, is fixing themselves. They're being metakin. I want to ready or fix myself to be able to consume more. So you see, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. The same way you can't fix yourself by inducing vomiting on Shabbos. You also can't fix the baby whose joints or whose limbs are out of whack. Rav Shesha says that's not a good comparison. Hasam lavarche. That's not normal, or that's not the normal course of events to induce vomiting, so you can go ahead and eat more. Hacha orche. But here, when a baby is born and the limbs are out of their joints, it is normal to swaddle the baby, to go ahead and rearrange the limbs, not to rearrange, but to push the limbs back into the sockets. Rav Shesha is minam Allah. Rav Shesha, how do I know that it's mutter to ultimately straighten out the baby on Shabbos? This nan machat shal yad litol ba'as hakots. Interesting, because Rav Shesha says that halacha l'maisa on Shabbos you're allowed to use the needle in order to go ahead and take out the splinter. Now, both say, now what does that show you? So what's interesting about this, both says as follows. Rav Shesha is pointing out that halacha l'maisa you are permitted to take out a splinter. Now, the fact that you're permitted to take out a splinter means what? That if there's something that causes discomfort, you are permitted to rectify that on Shabbos. So the same way that you're permitted to take out a splinter, you're permitted to straighten out the limbs of the baby on Shabbos. But I just want to point out over here, none of this, interestingly enough, in the eyes of Chazal, was a concern of refuah, was a concern of medicinal healing. Because in these situations, there's not an ailment. There's a discomfort. The splinter is discomfort. So removal of the splinter, interestingly enough, does not fall under the category of medicinal healing. So if Sheshes therefore wants to posit the same way that the removal of a splinter doesn't fall under the category of medicinal healing, but rather again it's just the alleviation of pain. Therefore you're permitted to straighten out the limbs of the baby on Shabbos also, because there's no refuah there. It's just the alleviation. Some pakid haha lo pakid. Interestingly enough, he says the difference with look at Rashi. Pakid hakotz hazeh eno mechuber bo ela mufkad v'nasun sham v'hotza asa eno tikun hacha lo pakid v'dami lemelacha shemesachin umachnisan lemakom chibar. So he says, the splinter is embedded, but it's not part of the body. So because it's embedded in that part of the body, therefore its removal does not resemble tikkun, does not resemble fixing, but straightening out of the limbs of the baby, which ultimately, again, is inserting them back into their sockets, that is tikkun. That ultimately represents fixing, and because that's fixing, therefore, again, Rav Nachman will say that it's asur on Shabbos. We'll say it happens to be that halacha l'maisa, that Ram Shulchan Aruch passes like Rav Sheshes, that it is permitted to straighten out the limbs of a baby on Shabbos to push them back into their sockets. And ultimately, interestingly enough, it's not an issue of refuah, which is really quite fascinating. It does not fall under the category of the prohibition of medicinal healing. Again, and obviously doesn't pass the threshold of metakin, of like makeh bepatish either. Incredible. Says the Mishnah, Kana shel zaysim. So we'll say if you have a rod, an olive rod. Now, what would you use an olive rod for? So it says we're going to see that rod, again, we're talking about olives that are placed inside of a press. So if you're putting olives in a press, halacha lemaisa, you would go ahead and you would turn over the olives to see if they were ripening or not. And now when I say ripening, remember they're already in the press. Part of pressing olives, I'll say before you would actually press them, you would let them sit in the vat together. And olives, which are all sitting together, generate heat. That heat already softens them and allows the olives to begin to emit oil. So what you would do is you would turn over the olives. So that was done with a kana shel zaysim, an olive rod. So kana shel zaysim, im yesh kesher v'rosha mekabel tuma. If it has a knot at the tip of it, it's mekabel tuma. Ve'im lav ein mekabel tuma. But if it doesn't have a knot on the tip of it, then it's not mekabel tuma. Bein kach ubein kach nitl b'Shabbos. And halacha l'maisa, again, whether it has a knot, doesn't have a knot, halacha l'maisa, it can be moved on Shabbos because you could find permitted ways to use such an item. Okay, says the Gemara. I don't understand. Why is the olive rod makabel tuma? Pshute klietzu. Let's remember again, back to Hilchos Tuma for just a moment, I promise. Remember again, when it comes to Hilchos Tuma, so there's something called pshute klietz. Pshute klietz means a flat wooden utensil with no receptacle. In general, we assume that a wooden utensil with no receptacle is not makabel tuma. An olive rod, the pashtos, is a flat wooden utensil with no receptacle. If so, why is it makabel tuma? To which the Gemara says, my time, dumya desak. My time, dumya desak. But because we'll say in general, when it comes to tuma, so in order for an object to be makabel tuma, it has to be comparable to a sack. A sack, just like the sack, ultimately again has a receptacle. So to the eight wooden utensils have to have a receptacle as well. So Tana Mishvei Rav Nechemya b'shar shemahapech b'zeisim hofcho v'ro'abo. So we'll say ultimately again. So because why? Because at the time when you go ahead and you flip over the olives, you literally hofcho, you turn over the olives v'ro'abo, and you examine the rod. Now what's the pshat? Look at Rashi. So let's listen to this. There was often a knot at the end of this rod. So interestingly enough, the halacha is that in that knot, it almost formed like a little bit of a natural cavity. So when you would turn over the olives, you would see there would get some oil stuck in that cavity. So because it has a shtickle cavity, therefore halacha l'maisa, that's called the receptacle. And because this is the receptacle, therefore the olive rod is mekabel tuma. Beautiful. Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, now here's something very interesting. We're going to get now, it's just quite fascinating how the Gemara is arranged, because we've spent a lot of time on muktzah. It's actually, again, I know many of you are probably surprised to see that we're back in muktzah again. Right? We're now watching the 17th chapter of Shabbos. What's fascinating is muktzah's d'Rabbanan, yet it gets the greatest amount of coverage in Masechah Shabbos out of all the malachos. It's really quite fascinating. Now, in this sugi that we're about to do, we're actually going to see the actual evolution of the concept. It's very exciting. It really is. It's actually quite riveting. We're going to see the actual evolution. You're going to mamish feel it as if you're living through it. The actual evolution of the halachos of muktzah. So watch this. Rabbi Yossi says, "Kol hakelim nitalim." Rabbi Yossi, this is going to blow your mind. Rabbi Yossi says, the truth is, you could carry anything you want on Shabbos, right? 99% of utensils are not muktzah on Shabbos. This is like mind blowing, with the exception of chutz min hamasar hagadol, with the exception ultimately again of a large saw, b'yesed shel macharisha. So I'll say yesed shel macharisha literally means the coulter of the plow. Now what it actually means, I will say, is a plow, right, has a large sharp blade. It could have more than one blade, but it has at least one blade. That's, remember again, when you pull the plow over the soil, that's that blade that overturns the soil. So Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, nothing is muktzah on Shabbos except for a large saw and the large blade of a plow. Right? Mind-blowing, no? Mind-blowing. We spent all this time trying to figure out at the end of the day, like what's muktzah, what's not muktzah. Rabbi Yossi essentially saying nothing is muktzah except for these two items. Says the Gemara, what's that analyze? I'm going to go, Hai uchla de katzri, ki yaseh chamach haresha. So once it comes along Reb Nachman and says, Ochla de Katzri, Rashi says, Ochla de Katzri, Klein nechoshes ha'asrei kinafa, nekavim v'ushal kovsim, v'nosno ala begadim, umezalif bo mayim. So let's listen to this. This is actually very interesting. So Reb Nachman says, literally a launderer's sieve. So what they would use is, this would be a utensil that had perforations, and when laundering a garment, apparently some garments you didn't want to soak in the water. So instead what you would do is you would pour water through the sieve, and the launderer's sieve would sprinkle water on the utensil. So Rav Nachman says the launderer's sieve is just like the Yaseh Shamach Harisha, which is another way of saying it's muktzah. It's muktzah. Amar Abaye, Charva du ushchapi. So literally again, a tanner's knife, or sakina da ashkafta. Rashi says over chatzina da ashkafta is literally a butcher's knife, or the Gemara says chatzina denagri ki Yaseh Shamach Harisha dami. All of these different types of knives, which was essentially were specialty knives, right? Knives that people used in their particular malachas, in their particular forms of work. These knives have the status of the blade of the plow, meaning that just as the blade of the plow, halacha l'maisa, is muktzah, right, and set aside for knives. Because we'll say, remember again, what's the idea? Let's just go back for just a moment. According to Rabbi Yossi, why did Rabbi Yossi say that all these two items are muktzah and nothing else is muktzah? Because I will say items like a large saw or the blade of the plow were never used for anything other than their intended purposes. All of the utensils could be multi-purposed, right? Could blade of a plow, we'll say it's not the pshat that someone says, you know what, it's not a clean knife. Do me a favor, pass me the blade of the plow to cut my chicken, right? To cut my piece of meat, right? No one does that. No one does that. So we'll say, therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, these items are set aside for non-use. The list is now growing of items that were not used for anything other than their specific malacha. So, for example, specialty knives, a tanner's knife, right? A butcher's knife. These are specialty knives and would not be used for anything other than their intended purpose. Since their intended purpose, of course, is asur on Shabbos, therefore these utensils by definition become muktzah. Tana Rabbana, both say here we go. Berishon is very exciting. Berishona, hayu omrim, shlosha kelim nitalin b'Shabbos. In the beginning they said that there are only 3 utensils that you can move on Shabbos. 3 utensils that are permitted for use on Shabbos. What were they? Miktsah shel devela, the knife used to go ahead and cut a cake of pressed figs. Zuama listerin shel kedera, the ladle used to scrape off the foam from a pot. V'sakin kitana shel gabe shulchan, and a small knife that you would keep on the table, used for cutting food. So we'll say in the beginning, right, in the first iteration of Hilchos Muktzah, pretty much the way it started was everything is Muktzah. That's how it starts. Everything is Muktzah, with the exception of 3 things. The knife you need to cut your cake of pressed figs, a ladle, and a small knife on your table. That's it. Everything else is Muktzah. What happened? Hetiru, v'chazru v'hetiru, v'chazru v'hetiru. Then slowly began to permit more utensils, and more utensils, and more utensils. Aksha amru, Kala kelim nitalin b'Shabbos chutz min hamasra gadol v'yaseh shamach harisha. And so they came to a point where they said, actually, everything is permitted for movement on Shabbos, for use on Shabbos, except for a large saw and the blade of the plow. So you see the evolution? Hilchos Muktzah apparently began by saying everything is usur, except for 3 things, right? The knife to cut the cake of pressed figs, a ladle, and a small table knife. Then they permitted until everything was mutter for use on Shabbos, with the exception of a large saw and the blade of the plow. So the Gemara says, "My hetiru v'chazru v'hetiru v'chazru v'hetiru." What does that mean? They permitted more. Amar Abaye will say first wide line, hetiru davar shemalachto leheter litzorech gufo. They permitted ultimately again a davar shemalachto leheter. So we'll say now a davar shemalachto leheter means a utensil that has a totally permitted purpose. So they allowed a kli shemalachto leheter that could be moved litzorech gufo. We'll say now we're going to get into very important terms here. Tzorech gufo means for its own use, right? To use it. So, for example, again, kli shalachta, let's say the heter would be a fork, right? The fork has a primarily permitted purpose on Shabbos. So, tzorech gufo means to use it as a fork. So, therefore, again, they allowed a kli shalachta heter to be used in its primary way. V'chazu ve'tiru davar shalachta leheter letzorech mikomo. And then afterwards, they allowed you to use a permitted utensil. They permitted you to move it because you need the space that it occupied. The chazu ve'tiru davar shamalachto liser letzorech gufo in letzorech mikomo lo. Then Abba said the next iteration was a kli shamalachto leiser. Kli shamalachto leiser is an item that has a primarily prohibited use. They permitted you to go ahead and use that item in a permitted fashion, but they did not permit you to move that item just because you need the space that it occupies. Va'adayin, and still even in that iteration of the halacha, biyado achas in b'shtei yadav lo. You could only move a utensil that could be moved with one hand, but you could not move a utensil that was so large that it required two hands. Ad sha'amru, until they came along and said, kol hakelim nitalin b'shabes va'afilu b'shtei yadayim. Until they came along and permitted, they told you that you could even move a utensil that can only be moved with two hands. Right? We'll see. We're going to stop over here for today. I know I'm leaving off a little bit of a cliffhanger over here with Amarava, but I will say again, we'll continue with this tomorrow because what you're seeing over here in this Gemara, but by the time we get to the end of it, which is the bottom of the daf, you're going to see the entire evolution of the process of muktzah. How we started essentially in a very restrictive place, kind of permitted, and then you're going to see Chazal pulled it back a little bit to settle in the framework of muktzah as we have it today. We'll stop over here for today. Again, davening, if for those who are joining us 7 a.m. in the shul parking lot or inside the shul.